Where does Steve Sarkisian rank amongst the top head coaches in college football?
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Remember, terms and conditions do apply. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, we are ranking the top head coaches in college football while also answering the question, where does Steve Sarkisian fit amongst those top coaches? Where does he rank amongst the elite in the sport right now? And some very interesting content over the last week on Locked On Longhorns, which produces some very interesting comments over the last week on Locked On Longhorns on my YouTube. So some of my favorites over the last week, I'm reading and reacting to them in the last segment of today's show. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Where does Steve Sarkisian rank amongst the elite in college football today, amongst the top head coaches? I got the inspiration for the topic for today's show based on something I said last week when I was doing my Where Jonathan is Right, Where Jonathan is Wrong episode last Thursday. And I talked about how, when I started covering, this team on this podcast going into the 2022 season, CBS Sports does a top 50 list of head coaches every year, and I believe they had Steve Sarkisian going into that season ranked 35th. And then after he went 8-5, I believe he jumped up to like between 21 and 24. I can't remember specifically, but he was still, kind of outside of the top 20 head coaches in college football. And I always felt like Steve Sarkisian, was well respected and viewed as one of the, better head coaches in college football. But there were certain plateaus on his resume that he had not achieved yet, right? Certain plateaus that are major milestones for, head coaches at this level, right? 10-win seasons, conference championships, and college football playoff appearances. So I always felt like we knew that Steve Sarkisian could be one of the top head coaches in college football, but he just had to reach certain plateaus on his resume. And thankfully for Texas, he reached all three of those this year, right? And so because he did that, and I know we still have games to play, this season, I thought to come back and reevaluate this list, right? I don't have time to wait for CBS Sports to do it over the summer. I'll do it now, right? I'll do it today. And so I ranked the top head coaches in college football until I got to Steve Sarkisian, and that's where I ended my list. He ended up just outside of the top 10. I wanted to make it a top 10 list, but there was just 10 brothers ahead of him, right? I had to be, somewhat unbiased and fair. So it's a top 11 list because that's where Steve Sarkisian fell in. And we don't do suspense here on Locked On Longhorns. So I'm going to tell you the 11 right now so you can hop in the YouTube comments and argue with me without even hearing my justification over the next 20 minutes because that's how YouTube works anyway, right? So Nick Saban, the GOAT, I have him at number 1. Kirby Smart, number 2. Jim Harbaugh, number 3. Mike Norvell, number 4. Dabo Swinney, number 5. Lincoln Riley, number 6. Kyle Whittingham, number 7. Brian Kelly, number 8. Ryan Day, number 9. Kalen DeBoer, number 10, and Steve Sarkisian, number 11. I will start with Steve Sarkisian, give him my analysis, and then work my way down all the way to Nick Saban at number 1. Now, before I get into Steve Sarkisian and what makes him a fringe top 10 coach in college football at this point, I want to mention some OGs, right? This was a very tough list to make, and obviously I had to leave some, great coaches off of the list, or they didn't crack the top 11, right? Mack Brown won a national championship at the University of Texas, one of the best coaches in the sport over, the last 20 to 30 years, and he's done a really, respectable job at North Carolina. They've really had some fun teams there, but they haven't had any teams that, had a, necessarily high ceiling at North Carolina, or teams that we felt like could go out and win it at the highest level. And I feel like the 10 coaches on the list, or the 11 coaches on the list I have ahead of Mack Brown, have had that type of success or have had those type of teams in recent memory. So Mack Brown has been one of the best coaches over the last 30 years, but right now I would not say he's a top 11 coach in college football. Mike Gundy and Kirk Ferentz, 2 OGs who have been, great coaches for the last 20 years at their respective universities, Oklahoma State and Iowa. They both have won conference championships. Mike Gundy in 2011. I think Kirk Ferentz has a couple at Iowa, but neither one of them have had those high-end teams that we felt like could win national championships, maybe outside of one or two flash in the pan years at those two schools. So Kirk Ferentz, Mike Gundy, and Mac Brown are some of the best coaches in college football overall when you look at their resume. But right now, I have them outside of the top 11. Now, starting with Steve Sarkisian, he is 71-48 across Washington, USC, and Texas. Some of the highlights including taking a 0-win team at Washington and taking them to 5 wins, which is very hard to do as Coach Prime, right? He couldn't do that with two of the best players in college football. He won 9 games in his first season at USC, was dismissed in his second season at USC. We all know why. And in his third year at Texas, got his first conference championship, his first 10-win season, and his first college football playoff appearance in the 4-team bracket, which means something, right? And, you know, I know this is a coordinator thing, but I'm biased. As Steve Sarkisian led maybe the greatest college football offense of all time at Alabama in 2020. So based on what Steve Sarkisian did this year, based on what he's accomplished in the past, and based on what the trajectory of this Texas football team looks like over the next few years in the SEC, I'm more than comfortable with saying Steve Sarkisian is a top 11 fringe top 10 coach in college football right now. Number 10, I got Kalen DeBoer. I promised I wanted to put Sark at number 10, but I saw this brother's resume and I was like, man, it cannot be ignored. He has been dominant as a head coach. 103-11 as a head coach. Kalen DeBoer, this is Washington. Sorry, I should have said that. I know he's not a household name yet, but give the brother some time, right? He's winning almost 90% of his games, if that's not 90%, right? I didn't even do the percentage, but 103-11 is crazy. And when he got to the Power 5 level, he did not miss a beat. 24-2 as the head coach at Washington over the last 2 years. Washington was a 4-win football team in 2021. So it's him. For sure, it's him and Michael Penix Jr., right? Those are the uncommon denominators, I guess, right? From 2021 to 2022. And Washington is currently on a 20-game win streak. He has been a head coach for 9 years. He has 7 double-digit win seasons in 9 of those years, and he has 3 national championships at Sioux Falls at the lower level. I do not know where Sioux Falls is. I just know he was over there running it up, right? Like I said, in 2 years as a Power 5 head coach, 24 wins, a 13-0 conference championship season, and 1 college football playoff appearance. So everywhere he's gone, he's won at a dominant level, and he stepped into the Power 5 and did not miss a beat. And that's why I have Kalen DeBoer a step above Steve Sarkisian, because he's been able to accomplish just a little bit more than Sark in just 2 years at the Power 5 level. Ryan Day at number 9. I know this one is going to be a little bit controversial. A lot of people like to say that, you know, Ryan Day was born on third base and, you know, it's Ohio State, you know what I mean? And, you know, a lot of the perception about Ryan Day is, you know, he can't beat Michigan and he's just some loser who has the luckiest job in the world, right? And I think that Ryan Day is a hell of a coach, but he's at a school like the Ohio State, one of the most premier programs in sports, really not even in college, right? It's just one of the most premier programs in sports where really only one game matters on your schedule, right? So Ryan Day is 56-7 as a head coach at the Ohio State University, but because he's lost 3 games in a row to Michigan, it's like, oh, he can't coach. He is 56-7 as head coach at the Ohio State University. So I think that it's just more about the standard that Ohio State has for their coaches rather than Ryan Day's lack of an ability to coach, right? And when you look at his resume, he is undoubtedly a top 10 coach in the sport right now. He has 2 conference championships, 4 college football playoff appearances. He has 1 national championship appearance. And last year, I'm going to say this, he was a missed field goal away from beating the hell out of TCU. I probably shouldn't have said the hell and TCU in the same sentence, but he was beating the crap out of TCU in the national championship last year. Marvin Harrison Jr. got hurt in that game. It still came down to a field goal for Ohio State to kick it, win it, and play TCU in the national championship. And they missed it, and the rest is history. Georgia goes on to win that game by 50-plus points. But Ohio State would have won that game too. And so if the only difference between Ryan Day being a good coach and being some lucky loser who just happens to be at Ohio State is his kicker missing a field goal against Georgia last year, and he's only lost 7 games since 2019, with 4 college football playoff appearances, then yes, I certainly think Ryan Day is one of the 10 best head coaches in the sport. It may not be good enough for Ohio State and Ohio State fans, but there are 128 college football teams that probably be knocking on the door for Ryan Day right now if he was let go. He is that good. 4 10-win seasons in 4 full years. Don't let the expectations at Ohio State fool you. He's a good coach. Brian Kelly at number 8. if this brother was to win a national championship, I probably have to put him a little bit higher because he has a hell of a resume. 282 wins, 103 losses, 2 ties across 5 schools, 9 conference championships, and he spent 12 years at Notre Dame, right? So a lot of those years he wasn't even eligible to win a conference championship. 1 national championship appearance with Notre Dame and then 2 college football playoff appearances. Unfortunately, he was 0-3 in those games. He has 13 double-digit win seasons as a head coach and led LSU to the SEC championship in just his first game there, after Ed Orgeron somehow ruined one of the best programs in college football. Brian Kelly got them right back into contention, and then had a Heisman winner in his second year at LSU. So Brian Kelly, one of the best coaches in the country, had him coming in at number 8 on the list. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get with Kyle Whittingham at 7, all the way down to Nick Saban at number 1. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the right people to help find right professionals for your team faster and for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Remember, terms and conditions do apply. So Kyle Whittingham may be the only coach in my top 11 that has not made the college football playoff yet, but we all know, that watch college football, we think of Utah as one of the most respectable programs in college football, and that's largely because Kyle Whittingham, a lot of people don't know that he took over directly after Urban Meyer, right? Urban Meyer's been at 4 different stops since then, and Kyle Whittingham has been at Utah since 2005. 162 wins and 78 losses, a 3-time conference champion, with 2 of those coming in the last 3 years, especially last year knocking off Caleb Williams in USC, right? That was a really good win. He had a 13-0 season with the New Year's 6 Sugar Bowl win in 2008 and 7 10-win seasons and 18 full years at Utah. And although he hasn't had the college football playoff appearance or high-end success just yet, he's had some 11-2 conference championship teams, but you're talking about competing for national championships. With Cam Rising and with his experience in college football coming back next year, what this Utah team has and just the way that they play in the trenches year in and year out, and with the physicality they play with, I think they certainly have the leg up to win the Big 12 next year. They should be one of the best teams in the Big 12 next year. They should find a way into the 12-team college football playoff, and I am not doubting Cam Rising, Kyle Whittingham at all if they get into a situation where they have to win 2 or 3 games to win a national championship. So Kyle Whittingham might be my only top 11 coach right now without a college football playoff appearance, but that will come. But I don't think there's any doubt that he's one of the 11 best coaches in college football. Lincoln Riley, I got him at number 6. I know he's coming off of a down year, and a lot of people are pouring on Lincoln Riley. He might not seem like he's the 6th best coach in college football right now, but I'm going to give him some grace, right? He went 7-5. I think a lot of that had to do with, one, the defense just sucks, right? And they don't play with, the mentality of a great defense or just a team that wants to win games in the trenches, period. But 2, I also think that this was a team that had, national championship and college football playoff aspirations the entire year. And college football can be deflating when you lose 2 games and you essentially know that the whole perception of your season has changed. And so this USC team was way too talented and way too good to lose 5 games. I just essentially think they quit. Now, you can blame Lincoln Riley for that and say, why did the team quit? And why did they not go out there and play at the highest level when they felt like they had nothing to play for? I'm not sure, right? If we're just talking resumes, I still think Lincoln Riley has a top 6 resume in college football when it comes to coaches. 73-18 as a head coach across Oklahoma and USC. You could say that, he was set up well for success at Oklahoma, but he carried it on, right? 4 conference championships and 3 playoff appearances, although he was 0-3. In those playoff appearances, he still got there 3 times. He also coached 3 Heisman winners and Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, and Caleb Williams. And he has 5 double-digit win seasons in 7 years of coaching. So Lincoln Riley had a down year. That team is still loaded, and I expect them to be right back on top next year. Lincoln Riley is still a good coach, right? Don't write him off just yet, even though I know, obviously I'm preaching to a choir that hates Lincoln Riley for sure. Dabo Swinney, I got him at number 5. That's probably a little bit questionable based on what's happened the last couple of years. But I think the demise of Clemson and Dabo Swinney has been overblown a little bit. First of all, I mean, when you talk about the resume, who wouldn't kill for this resume? 169 wins and 43 losses as the head coach at Clemson, 2 national championship victories, 3 appearances, 8 conference championships in the ACC, and 12 straight 10-win seasons from 2011 to 2022. You're talking about, Alabama territory there, winning 10 straight games for over a decade at a program like Clemson in South Carolina. I mean, it's not it's not like, no low tier program or anything like that, but it's in South Carolina. Like, I don't know. South Carolina is just a super appealing state. Not that I know of, right? And in 2023, they went 8-4, which was his worst year since 2018, right? Or not even, no, 2008, I believe. Yeah, because they had went since 10th Street. Yeah. I wrote that down wrong. Sorry. So in 2023, they went 8-4, which was his worst year since 2008, right? And 8-4 was his worst year in over a decade. So if Dabo Swinney, adjusts and gets out of his own way and taps into NIL and the transfer portal, then I definitely think you can see Clemson at the top of college football again, competing for conference and national championships. But that's a big if, because, he said that, his program is built through God's name, image, and likeness, and he has snubbed his nose at the transfer portal anytime he's been asked about it. So we'll see, like I said on yesterday's episode, adapt or die. But if Dabo Swinney adapts, Clemson is right back in the national championship conversation. Mike Norvell, I got him at number 4, 69-31 across Memphis and Florida State. He started off 8-13 at Florida State, trying to fix that mess that Jimbo Fisher left over. But since then, he is, well, not even Jimbo Fisher. He wasn't the last coach at Florida State, but they hadn't recovered since the glory days at Florida State under Jimbo Fisher. And Mike Norvell started off 8-13 there. But since then, he went 23-3 in the last 2 years at Florida State, and that included a 13-0 conference championship this year and should have been a playoff appearance. We have never seen an undefeated Power 5 conference champion get left out of the college football playoffs until this year. And I've been on record multiple times. I'll say it again. I think that the college football playoff committee got it right and put the 4 best teams in, but that does not mean that an undefeated Power 5 champion, undefeated Power 5 conference champion should be left out of the playoffs. So he went out and did something on his resume that should have earned him a college football playoff appearance. So I can't look at him and say, well, he doesn't have one. He went out there and went 13-0 and won the ACC, right? And any other year that would have got him into the playoffs. And of course, moving forward, when they move to 12 teams, Florida State should be in the playoffs perennially. Jim Harbaugh, number 3, 142-52 across San Diego, Stanford, and Michigan. 5 conference championships, 3 at Michigan. And what I love about Jim Harbaugh is he has coached long enough to change the narrative completely, right? Do you remember it was just really not even 3, it was like 2.5 years ago where Jim Harbaugh couldn't win the big game at Michigan, right? And the narrative was that he could not beat Michigan State and he could not beat Ohio State because they had just lost to Ohio State in 2020 for however many years in a row. And then he lost to Michigan State in the regular season in 2021, right? So there were narratives just 2 years ago that he could not win the big game, but then he ended up beating Ohio State that year. He's beaten them 3 years in a row, has not lost to Michigan State since then. Obviously, Michigan State has fallen off the face of the earth. And the only 2 games he's lost since that Michigan State game in 2021 were games in the college football playoffs to Georgia, who ended up going on to win the national championship, and then a bad loss to TCU. But I can't blame somebody for their 2 losses in the last 2 years being in the college football playoffs. So Jim Harbaugh has coached long enough to change the narrative from being not able to win the big game to being the 3rd best coach in college football, in my opinion. Once again, 5 conference championships, 3 the last 3 years at Michigan with 3 college football playoff appearances. So Jim Harbaugh certainly in the top 3, and a championship. I don't know if it'll put him over Kirby Smart because I guess Kirby Smart has 2. So he's kind of stuck at that number 3 spot. But a championship would go a long way for Michigan and Jim Harbaugh for them to believe who they think they are, right, in college football. Kirby Smart, number 2. 93-16 at Georgia since 2016, so he's been great. Had his alma mater. I also think he deserves a ton of credit for the Alabama, dynasty and the Alabama success story because he was Nick Saban's defensive coordinator for the first 8 years at Alabama, right? And so they had some of the greatest defenses of all time, and then he's carried that over to Georgia where they've had some of the greatest defenses of all time. So I think you have to give Kirby Smart some resemblance of credit for that Alabama run, just a little bit, right? I think he helped out Nick Saban just a little bit. A lot lost 2 football games in the last 3 seasons, both to Alabama, and Nick Saban, his mentor, right? So that's his only kryptonite. And he's also beaten him in the national championship since then, right? 2 national championship victories and 3 appearances, and then 2 conference championships at the University of Georgia. Many people said Kirby Smart had eclipsed, Nick Saban as the best coach and the best program in college football right now. And then Nick Saban just continues to prove he won't go away, beating Georgia this year to knock them out the playoffs and secure the SEC championship and get to the college football playoffs once again. And that's why Nick Saban is my number 1 coach in college football. And there is a lot of room between him and number 2, because Nick Saban might be the greatest of all time, not just in the sport right now. 292 wins, 70 losses, and 1 tie across Toledo, Michigan State, LSU, and Alabama. 7 national championships as a head coach, all coming in the SEC, right? 1 at LSU and 6 at Alabama, 12 conference championships, and they have won 10 games every year at Alabama since I was a sophomore in high school. I just turned 30 in September. That is over a decade of dominance and the best dynasty we've seen outside of the New England Patriots in our lifetime. I don't know. I shouldn't speak for everybody, I guess, because I'm 30 years old, but the best dynasty I've seen in my lifetime outside of the New England Patriots. And also, he has had 4 Heisman winners at Alabama since 2007. So if my math is correct, that's around 25% of the Heisman winners since he's been the head coach at Alabama have been from the University of Alabama. So Nick Saban, greatest coach of all time, in my opinion, certainly the greatest coach in college football right now. And once again, he's 2 games away from winning another national championship and putting 8 on his resume, which is insane. A quick word from our sponsors. Well, let me recap the list, right? If you listened this far and don't remember the full top 11. It was Nick Saban, number 1, Kirby Smart, number 2, Jim Harbaugh, number 3, Mike Norvell, number 4, Dabo Swinney, number 5, Lincoln Riley, number 6, Kyle Whittingham, number 7, Brian Kelly, number 8, Ryan Day, number 9, Kalen DeBoer, number 10, and Steve Sarkisian at number 11. So you probably already argued with me in the comments. You probably already told me why I was wrong. But if you listened this far, and respected the analysis, then let me know. Was I right? Was I wrong? Is Steve Sarkisian too high? Am I being biased? Is Steve Sarkisian too low? Where do you have him ranked amongst the top head coaches in college football? Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the National Football League. All right, so the easiest third segment in the world, right? Whenever I can't think of what to talk about, I just let y'all do the talking for me, essentially. So like I said, some really interesting content over the last week on Locked On Longhorns. I did, the recap show of us winning the Big 12 and, getting the announcement we're going to the college football playoff. I ranked all 4 teams in the playoffs offensively and defensively. A lot of research for those episodes and a lot of good, commentary on those episodes. I was proud of those. And I did my where Jonathan was right and where Jonathan was wrong with my preseason expectations going into the season. And then yesterday, what did I do on yesterday's show? So you put out so much content you can't even remember, right? Trying to think, what was the theme of yesterday's show? Oh, the transfer portal, right? Who Texas should target in the transfer portal. And I also talked about Jaden Daniels, or who Texas is targeting in the transfer portal. I also talked about Jaden Daniels winning the Heisman. And then my reaction to the Doak Walker Award, the Blitnikoff, and the Outland Trophy by Texas' very own Tavondre Sweat. All right, so like I said, some really interesting content over the last week. And that content has produced these comments on Locked On Longhorns. Sark has definitely utilized the portal and NIL positively and in a balanced way to promote development of the younger athletes. Juxtaposed is, in my opinion, Colorado, who is going way too hard on the portal. This unbalanced use could show a lack of ability or care to develop and promote a long-term successful program. I think that's an amazing comment, something I really hadn't thought about. Steve Sarkisian is building it the organic way and then using the transfer portal to supplement what we, don't have from the high school ranks. But the foundation of our football team, the development of our football team is coming from those high school classes, right? And the transfer portal has just kind of been the cherry on top for the University of Texas, where our program like Colorado is relying on the transfer portal every year to build a contending football team, right? And they're not really bringing in a foundation or bringing in great players in the high school ranks. So you're looking at a team and a program like Colorado who has to build chemistry every year. They have to build camaraderie every year. They have to build their culture every year because you're bringing in new, completely different football players every year. So, there's just a lot, a turnover at Colorado. And I think, you're going to see the result of that turnover on the field, where Steve Sarkisian and other programs are using NIL and the transfer portal to build a sustained, juggernaut of winning, right? That can last for years to come because you're recruiting really well at the high school level and then using the transfer portal to fill those holes in your roster rather than trying to use the transfer portal to build your entire roster. So that was a good comment from VEKUND, Vikunde. I'm not sure how to say that, right? Alan Watts, 2210, one of my favorite subscribers. He's been with me for a minute. I got name recognition now when I see him come up in the comments. So this was about Andrew Makuba, the safety from Clemson, from Austin. He went to LBJ, and Texas is targeting him in the transfer portal right now. This is from Alan Watts. Makuba's 40-meter time is 4.33 seconds. That's what I'm talking about, exclamation point. I imagine he knows how to look over his shoulder too, referring to looking for the ball when it's in the air. Welcome home, son. Like I legit laughed out loud when I read this comment, Alan, so good job. Glad you made it on the show. This is from Drake Johnson 295. I really don't know, bro. How you not up there with Inside Texas and Orange Bloods? Your shit is thorough, articulate, and straight to the point. I'm not sure, brother. You know what I'm saying? God got for me what God got for me, and I'm just blessed to be here and doing this show on Locked On Longhorns, man. James Davis, 2106, great breakdown of all four teams' offense. Jonathan, go Dogs. I wanted to include this in the show because Washington fans have been on me a little bit. Did not realize Washington fans are as spicy as they are, right? I've been seeing them on Twitter. They've been in my YouTube comments talking trash. I haven't even picked the game between Texas and Washington yet. I haven't even said who I think is going to win. And y'all know I don't hesitate to come on here and say Texas is going to lose if I think Texas is going to lose, right? I did it twice this year. It was wrong. So I don't know why Washington fans are in my comments calling me biased and acting like I'm the worst talking head Texas fan ever when I'm the furthest thing from that. So it was refreshing to see, Washington fan to give me props. Now here's another Washington fan, stinking Badgers, I guess, or Wisconsin, wherever he's from. From experience, if Shark says he is just going to visit a friend at another high-ranking school, start looking for another coach. I think he's pretty locked in at the University of Texas, but thank you for the warning. And then the last comment, I had to get this in on the show. Brian Martin, 8700, great content as always. I'd have to think long and hard about my favorite moments of the season, but my favorite moment of the Big 12 championship game is easy. It was seeing Jonathan Brooks on the field for the last play of the game. What an awesome gesture by Sark to a young man who has meant so much for the team. My wife almost teared up when I explained to her why he was out there. Can't wait for the Sugar Bowl. Hook 'em. I really appreciate that comment. I really appreciate that support. And I could just picture, you and your wife getting emotional looking at Jonathan Brooks, after dealing with that injury and being able to stand on the field and take that last snap and, get the ball tossed to him in the Big 12 championship game. So I really appreciated this comment. I damn near teared up reading it, and I definitely wanted to end another good episode of Locked On Longhorns with a really good message from Brian Martin, 8700. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.